CPS workers of Reddit, what was the worst case you have seen? Not a CPS worker, but my mom was a foster parent and ran a daycare out of the home, so we've known the specifics and assisted on a number of cases. One foster case was a child that was placed with us for about a week. He was a tiny little baby, and despite being in high school I work up to feed him. The mother was a teenage pregnancy who was abandoned by her parents for said pregnancy and simply didn't know how to care for a baby. CPS was really understanding and gave her classes, and then when she learned how often a baby actually needed to be fed, she got her child back. She reached out to us and thanked us for everything, and we got regular updates. Child is 2 now, very happy and loved. Another case where we called CPS. A mother brought her 4 kids to our daycare. Her oldest son and 3 daughters. Oldest son was 7 and did most of the care for his younger siblings, ranging from 2 to 5 in age. Mother was pregnant, again, when she was obviously below the poverty line. Baby was born. Her kids got progressively more and more dirty, to the point my mom reached out in a Facebook group for clothing donations for the kids. They'd get dropped off. She would bathe them all and dress them again. She made excuses for the mother, which she says now is her biggest regret. She just kept saying, this is her 5th child, and she's a single mom, and a new baby, it's hard. Then we had to care for the baby. Sickly, crapping blood. After 3 days with him, my mom called CPS. We were never told what happened with them, but I remember they came to pick some things up, and I remember looking out our front window and seeing them in the worker's car all crying. It's hard, but you know it's better for them in the end. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and was shadowing the after hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state, and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids, and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered sex offender. At 12. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who was the bio parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to pee and sex by her bio dad. Anyway, one night, one of the kids said, "Girl's name touched my penis." The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually, where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS and their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed on the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently that state and judge did things differently. So, when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties because she was a sex offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer, and her favorite thing to do was play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy, and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot, and I always wonder what happened to their family. This type of thing is why I oppose the sex offender registry as it currently works. That girl was probably a victim, and instead of getting her help, they ruined her life. Literally, her entire life will be different than it could have been, and not for the better. It makes me terribly sad and angry. Late to contribute, but thought I would add. I am a neurosurgeon, not a CPS worker. The case was infantile rape. The true disgust, however, is when you consider the mechanics that result in the degree of injury. A child is flexible but weak. In the effort to rape her, both hips were grossly dislocated. A child's orifices are obviously too small for such penetration, so the vagina and anus were severely torn. The penis entered the rectum at least a few times, resulting in rectal tears and colonic perforation. The vagina and cervix were torn as well, and the uterus was severely damaged. The baby, to deal with crying, may have been hit against an object, resulting in multiple rib and spinal fractures, as well as a depressed skull fracture. I have been in neurosurgery for over 10 years now, and this was the only time I let out a tear and vomited violently. The infant did not survive. I did not have the heart to follow up on the perpetrator, for I feared my reaction if I were to learn he got away, or if I did not agree with the punishment. Every so often a news story crops up in my path involving the rape of an infant, and it's the unreported logistics that makes me nauseous. Your account is not far from what I assumed the situation would be. Thank you for doing what you could. I didn't work in CPS, but I did work closely with CPS. I worked for a non-profit emergency shelter for children who had been abandoned, neglected or abused. Mind you, I worked at this shelter 10 plus years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. I get a call one night, worked graveyard, about 2 male sibling group coming in. They had been found and picked up at Motel Drive. The oldest is 11 and the other is 9. I start reading their case file, and there's a long abuse neglect history. After being with us a few days, the 11-year-old is showing increased signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoid, aggressive. He ends up pulling a knife on another one of the kids in the shelter because they came up from behind and grabbed him. Apparently, the mom, who was a H user, was prostituting the 11-year-old out to Johns so she could get money H. He would stay awake all night in the motel while she was out of it on H to make sure none of the Johns came back to hurt her or his younger brother. By the time the kid turned 12, he had been expelled from 3 different elementary schools and was banned from that particular school district. Eventually, mom lost custody, and the last I heard is they were placed in foster care. Former foster parent here. That reminds me of a girl I had who was pimped out by her mother at age 11 to mother's drug dealer. I asked her what her mother was doing when she was being raped, and she said getting high in the kitchen. Not CPS, but I worked in partnership with them. In all of these cases, CPS workers were on my side and their leadership was against them. They had far too many cases to be safe. I witnessed a physical assault on a child. It was incredibly violent, and the parent could have broken the child's neck while I was watching and moving towards them. I dialed 911 and stepped between them. I was later reprimanded for putting myself at risk. If the parent was willing to do that in front of me, what were they doing when no one could see? The state did not move them into foster care because they were too old and the oldest kid could watch out for the younger. I had an 11-year-old threaten suicide and refused a safety contract. We called crisis intervention. They did not come out because if she didn't safety contract, there wasn't a bed within 8 hours or so that could take her. And if they came out, they were responsible for her. I stayed with the client for, I think, about 14 hours. I had a buyer father return to the home after prison time for raping his daughter. They had the girls follow extensive safety procedures instead of tell the parents he couldn't return. There was likely a return to the sexual abuse. The state did not want to initiate a removal because she was old enough to learn to protect herself. I had a client with birth defects because he and his mother were the product of incest. The grandfather raped his much younger sister. The mom was the result. He raped her and my client was the result. He was following the pattern of sexually aggressive behavior and kept being returned from the facility where he was being treated, right back to the family where he was being abused. It was absurd. As a side topic, if you're struggling with drug addiction and think you're still a good parent, you aren't. That's your addiction fooling you. Get your kids into therapy and let them live elsewhere until you get yourself clean. I'm a CPS investigator, so I'm the front line of all the allegations. Here's some background just so you understand what my obligations are. Our state splits it up into 2 divisions, DHS and the state police, who have their own division. The state police get the worst allegations, such as sexual abuse, immersion, severe physical abuse and infant deaths. DHS gets the more run-of-the-mill, like cuts, bruises, welts, striking a child on the face, head, and any kind of neglect, medical, educational, environmental. I work for DHS, and here's the kicker, the state police can't do a removal. So if they feel a child isn't safe, they have to call us, and we reassess, then make a removal based on our decision. So the worst case I've worked is a case of neglect in which the 10-year-old female was in the custody of her legal father. He was on C. Even when he met me for scheduled interviews, he was high on C. In itself, that's just terrible. But after every meeting, he'd pick up and move so that I couldn't relocate. The final meeting he has with my supervisor while I attempt to locate the juvenile in order to take custody. He gets the gist of what's going on and has a friend pick the girl up from school and tells us he's having her sent to her aunt's home. But she never shows. Then he drops off too. Then he starts texting my work cell saying crap like I'll kill everyone before I'll let you take her. And remember, he's high on C. Finally, after 3 full days, I find her hiding under one of his friend's beds. He's arrested for fleeing. Find out this man is out on bond for taking a knife to the man who he thought called in the report. So I take custody of the child and have a hair follicle done. She tested significantly positive for C, as if she ingested it herself as it was processed through her liver. WTF. The only good thing is that she went to her aunt's home who had a clean background and is safe. Girl just though she was on an adventure with her dad. The worst case I've seen was a secondary response for the state police in order to do a removal. 8-month-old girl was being watched by her mother's boyfriend. The mom drove rigs for a living, so she was gone for long periods of time. The baby pee off the man enough that he dipped her. We call it baby dipping. It's a thing. Prepare yourself. He got water boiling and put it in the tub, then put the baby in the water. She had extensive burns over 70% of her body. That baby is going to have those scars forever. And to put yourself there, he got pee off, put water to boil, and waited for it to get hot. Waited all that time, knowing what the heck he's going to use it for, and then did it. Heard her screaming and then took her to his podunk regional hospital. She had to be transported to the state children's hospital. Then someone else had to call her mother and tell her what her boyfriend did to her daughter. And the worst part is, you get used to all that. First case I went on during training. Showed up at a house in a trashy town and instantly we are verbally assaulted by a obese, belligerent lady. This was mom and she was being accused of neglecting her children by not caring for their hygienic needs and not having any food. We tell her we need to chat with the kids alone but she refuses and stands by as we start talking. She keeps interrupting and yelling whenever we ask anything. My trainer calls the cops because she can tell the situation is escalating quickly and we need to talk to the kids. Cops show up. Mom sort of calms down, and we get to chat with the kids. Teenage boy is pee and refuses to tell us anything useful. 2 younger sisters, 8 to 11ish, don't say much but they didn't need to say anything. 2 little girls have nits in their hair so bad their scalp is bald and irritated on the back of their heads below the ears. Their hair was matted and basically one big dreadlock. These were white people so matting the hair like that is hard. When it's clear that the tide is turning against the mom she yells at the kids to run away and they follow orders. We spend the next hour trying to find the kids and then trying to get them away from the mom who has huddled them into a neighbor's yard in a corner. We get the kids back to a foster care agency office. No family was available to take the kids. And this was when my heart broke. The workers sit the girls on a chair over a large plastic sheet and start removing the nits with a knit brush hairbrush. I watch as hundreds and hundreds of dead living nits fall to the plastic under the girls and they start to cry because of it hurting. The workers were as gentle as possible but they had to have been infested for months if not longer. This is when I totally broke down and left the room and had to collect myself. Mind you, this is around 11 p. It turned out the mom had significant mental health needs she wasn't caring for and had been ignored by family for years so no one knew what was going on. School officials claimed they didn't notice anything but we suspected the kids weren't coming that the school liked it that way. Ugh. It's infuriating that the school did nothing. I had clients that kept getting reinfested with lice time and time again because the parents couldn't keep their houses clean. It was heartbreaking and the cases of neglect often came to our attention because the kids had to be sent home from school so often. Not a caseworker, but worked at a foster care agency for a while. Craziest case I heard about involved a kid that was very difficult to place because he had a bad habit of stealing cars, with a long rap sheet that was entirely stealing cars. The foster family he was placed with had their car stolen by him twice and had a meeting with the caseworker about it. Well, while the caseworker was there, the kid managed to sneak out and steal the caseworker's car. He drove it to the park because he had decided he wanted to go to the park. The kid was 9. I'm pretty sure they moved him to a group home after that. They should have revoked his driver's license. One of my uncles was a CPS worker for a good amount of time before he just couldn't do it anymore, and I can remember 2 cases that he brought up while at a get-together. 1. Mum was sending her 6-8-year-old daughter over the border to Mexico on a bus, where she would be picked up by pedophiles who would keep her for a few hours before sending her back with payment. 2. Dad was raping his 16-year-old son to the point that he had developed a defense mechanism that involved crapping on himself to keep his dad away. He ended up having to wear adult diapers after CPS took him because his defense mechanism became his go-to for whenever he felt scared. Not CPS, but we work with them on the regular. I had a kid who was younger than 2 readmitted for large burns. Guess it wasn't enough the first time. Thankfully, the crimes against children people stepped up this time and saw through the parents' bulls and yanked all the kids out of the house. Turns out the child had wet themselves, and so the parents sprayed them with boiling water. Kid was so used to pain they never made a peep the whole time we had them, not even for putting IVs in and cleaning their burn. Not me, but my friend used to do the law side of CPS. He had a case where the parents were addicted to H and the 5-year-old accidentally injected H and almost died from an overdose. They tried to argue they should keep the other 3 kids because they didn't ever odd. The dad wasn't allowed in the courtroom because he had a 9mm on him, and the mom went and tied off in the bathroom and was found passed out in a stall. The kids were all taken. My case was slightly different from what many would think can be the worst. I had a report about an incorrigible child. Pretty normal stuff. Parents tried everything, but they cannot control their child and are worried about the safety of the other children. This particular case was slightly different. The child and her 2 siblings were adopted by their grandparents. The grandparents stated that the one child, let's say her name was Ellen, was threatening to hurt her sibling and actually went as far to chase him around with a knife. Ellen was a 12-year-old at the time of this report. After further investigation and services with the family, I learned the full reason for the original adoption. When Ellen was younger, about 6, with her mother, she was being sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend. When Ellen's mother found out about the abuse, she murdered the boyfriend in front of Ellen and had Ellen help her clean up the mess. Now comes the grandparents unable to figure out why Ellen is troubled now. After talking to Ellen more, she was angry at her younger sibling for being normal, as he was also present for the murder but too young to remember. As I last keep up with the family, the grandparent and siblings left Ellen behind and moved to another state. Ellen is currently living with a foster family and is doing much better. Sorry if this is hard to read or follow, I am writing on mobile. I can explain more later tonight if people are interested. I don't work for CPS, but my girlfriend used to work for them as a receptionist filing clerk. Someone got drunk and left their kid in a baby carrier on top of a stove. The burner was not all the way off. She quit after she had to make copies of all the documents, read photos, on that case. Oh god. I used to work for a criminal defense attorney, and the first case file I had to organize was a homicide. I couldn't even look at the autopsy photos of a fully grown woman. I can't imagine having to look at photos of a child in that state. Not a CPS worker, but worked for a psych office contracted by CPS to interview test children and parents under investigation. Interviewed a mother accused of burning her 11-year-old across the face with an iron. I only saw pictures, but I couldn't sleep that night. The mother had dead eyes and spoke in a creepy monotone the entire time. Only referred to her child as the younger one, because she had an older child as well apparently. Never worked for CPS or the like, but there's a kid I've wondered about for a long time. When I was pregnant with my first spawn, over a decade ago, there was a girl who often had appointments around the same time as me. She was always there with what I assume were her mother and grandmother, and if that girl was a day over 11 years old, I'd be taken aback. She was so little and massively pregnant. She didn't even have breasts when I saw her, and she still wore bright, simple kid clothes and glittery shoes. I'll always wonder how the heck she ended up pregnant so young and how life has turned out for her thus far. When I was student teaching, this was in the late 90s, there was a 4th grader at that school who was pregnant. A 4th grader. Even if she had failed a grade, she would be no more than 10 or 11 at most. Before I worked as a social worker, I was direct care staff at a group home for teenage girls. One girl, B, was battling drug and alcohol addiction. She was only 13 years old at the time and had been placed with us through her treatment program. She lived about 40 minutes away from the group home, and the goal was to remove her access to her addictions while providing support. B and I had discussed her major triggers for using, and she mentioned her relationship with her mother was a major stressor. That night, I heard firsthand how bad things were. During a phone call, on speaker so we could monitor, I listened to this woman berate her daughter for no reason. I stepped in and ended the call, as B ran upstairs to her room. The mother called back and continued her rant. I handed the phone to my supervisor and went to find B. I found her in her closet, crying on the floor. She didn't want to talk, but she leaned on me and cried. I gave her some space and went back downstairs to talk to my supervisor. Within a few minutes, B had left the group home. She had no stop order. We couldn't physically stop her from leaving, and apologized as she ran off. We called the police and reported her AWOL. When I left that night, she hadn't returned. The following day, I got to the group home and was happy to see B had come back on her own. We notified her mom of her return. Mom called the town police and demanded B come home. She and the officers arrived and B refused to go. Mom tells B in front of everyone that she won't lock you in your room as long, and I promise that I'll feed you this time. We were shocked, but no one had any legal power to refuse B going back to this horrible situation. We were all powerless as she left back into the care of her abusive mother. B left me a poem that I still have nearly 12 years later. My heart hurts just wondering what happened to her. No one heard from her after that day. Not CPS, but I work at a CAC. 9-year-old whose mom had her drug dealer over. The mom ended up passing out in the bathroom all night while the drug dealer raped the little girl literally all night long. He's now in jail and little girl's grandma had full custody. Story makes me cry every time, even just typing it out. Especially because she wrote a letter to her caseworker that said, "Thank you for teaching me it's okay to feel sad and cry. Caseworker's name is my hero. Thank you for keeping me safe and helping me share my story so I can help other kids." Holy heck, that's some fricked up crap right there. At least she's in a better environment now. This is not CPS, but a very similar issue. I did an internship with an organization that helped human trafficking victims. It was seriously horrific. I cannot understand how any human can treat another human in these horrific manners. I will share the worst case without too much detail. A 14-year-old girl from a South American country was rescued in part of a raid on a forced labor rescue operation. The laborer's situation was bad enough, but the girl was held in a trailer and was provided to the workers for sex. The room had a mattress, a nightstand with paper towels, and a teddy bear. When I heard the details, I threw up. I originally wanted a career in human rights. This case broke me. I realized I did not have the emotional capacity required. I felt a lot of guilt after my decision to change track. But I also know I am no good to victims when I was so emotionally disturbed and wrapped up. I still do advocacy from a distance as a private person. I try to help people understand the horrors, and I try to keep an eye put for possible trafficking situations. But I can't be directly involved like I was. Humanity is truly terrifying. Why the frick do they not just send special forces into places like this just to clean out the fricking scum that calls itself people? Firstly, not as harrowing as some of the other tales here. Secondly, not CPS. My girlfriend works in a school and is well read in child development and works closely with social services etc. for child welfare. She told me the story of one young boy whose father was abusive to him and mum. Mum was a junkie and suspected prostitute. Little boy is often picked up from school by grandma but lives with mum. Several things escalate and my girlfriend learns that the little boy was taken from his mum as she has resumed on-off relationship with abusive father and has been placed in foster care temporarily. In an attempt to put a positive spin on things and maintain a sense of normality, she asked the little boy what his new bedroom was like. "It's warm. At my mum's I was always cold." That breaks my heart, that even the simplest things like that are something to point out as different now. If it's only an aspect as small as the temperature, I can only imagine how much better that little boy's new room must have been than the one his mother provided for him. I was a case manager for CPS. I had a toddler on my caseload who came into care BC of a severe beating that left her with a skull fracture and 2 broken femur bones. She was in a full body cast. She was in medical foster care. The mission of the agency was to have the children reunify with the parents. So, the parents had to complete a case plan and attend court hearings. It took a while, but the parents completed the case plan and the child was reunified. During this time, mom became pregnant again with a baby boy. She delivered around the same time the reunification occurred. The parents found the baby boy dead one morning. He was 6 weeks old and the same age his sister was when she came into care, and he had the same injuries. Before the reunification and the birth, I did everything I could to prevent either child from going back to that house. I even begged and cried in court. Dad was a suspect, but there was not enough evidence. He was a true monster. I waited 2 weeks, put in my notice and walked out. Entering this thread is like entering a door that says do not enter. I know I'll hate reading 100% of these responses. How would an average person do something to help? I couldn't do foster care, but I'd there a way to volunteer in other ways. To the CPS workers who read this, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for being emotionally invested even when you're drained. Thank you for being nurturing. Thank you for taking your work home. Thank you for doing it all without getting OT. Not a social worker, but I work for a law firm that represents parents and children once CPS brings it to court. A 5-year-old had gonorrhea, probably from being raped at daycare. Who does that? Child was additionally traumatized by removal from parents but was successfully returned after everyone agreed it wasn't the parents or their fault. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.